What if the emperor of mankind awoke in a universe that had never heard his name? Would the stars themselves tremble as his will touched their light, or would the cosmos ignore him, blind to the God that once held humanity in his hand? The question came not from prophecy, nor from madness. It came from silence, a silence that stretched across eternity, broken only by the sound of his breath returning. He awoke in darkness. Not the holy dark of the astronomican's chamber, nor the endless black between stars, but a smaller dark, fragile, human. He could feel the rhythm of a planet beneath him. Wind brushed against his face. Gravity, real, physical gravity, pulled at his flesh. His flesh. He had not felt his body in 10,000 years. He opened his eyes and beheld a sky unlike any he remembered. There were no orbiting ships, no planetary defense platforms, no golden halo of Terra's polluted light. The stars burned clean and sharp, untouched by the warp's corruption. And below him a city. It gleamed like a crown of steel and glass, humming with life and electricity. Towers stretched into the clouds. He could hear them, millions of voices, unaware of what had just appeared among them. Their world was peaceful. Ordinary. Unscarred by the endless wars he had known. A flicker of confusion rippled through his mind, 1,000 thoughts colliding, a lifetime of empire and suffering pressing against the limits of sanity. For an instant, he reached out with his psychic will, and the world screamed. Time slowed. Every electronic pulse faltered. Every thought on the planet bent toward him and recoiled. He felt something ancient and alien respond. Not daemons, not the chaos gods he had defied for millennia, but something, structured. Cosmic. Balanced between creation and destruction. The fabric of this universe was not like his. It obeyed different laws that recognized power, but not divinity. And yet they noticed him. Far above, beyond the thin veil of atmosphere, a mind brushed his own. Calm, disciplined, and burning with the light of a star. It was not the warp. It was something else, something pure. The Emperor turned his gaze skyward. And across the black between worlds, Kall of Krypton opened his eyes. The Emperor did not yet know this name. To him, it was only a presence, a light unlike the ruinous powers, but just as immense. For the first time in an age, he felt uncertainty. He stood upon a rooftop, bare feet on concrete, his robes torn and heavy with dust. Around him, a city lived its ordinary rhythm, unaware that two suns now shone upon its destiny. The Emperor inhaled. The air here was clean. The psychic echoes of humanity were peaceful. Not the hive madness of the Imperium's teeming masses, not the desperate cries of soldiers dying for a throne. These humans had not yet been broken. He whispered to the wind, and his voice carried through the minds of every soul within a mile. You are my children, yet you do not know me. 1,000 passers-by froze, glancing about as a shiver crawled through their spines. Somewhere, a preacher dropped his book of sermons. Somewhere else, a scientist's instruments glitched, their readings spiking into the impossible. Reality had noticed the intruder. And in the sky, Superman paused in flight, his eyes narrowing toward a pulse of impossible energy that felt like both a heartbeat and an apocalypse. The Emperor turned eastward, toward that gathering presence. He could feel it, the warmth of compassion, the purity of hope, the strength that had never been forged in war. He almost smiled. Hope. He had once believed in that word. Before the betrayal. Before Horus. Before 10,000 years of agony bound him to a throne that was both his salvation and his tomb. Now, on this strange world, the word tasted different. Alive. He took a step forward and every machine within 10 blocks shut down in unison. Street lights flickered. Traffic halted. The city fell into an eerie stillness, as though time itself bowed in reverence. The Emperor of Mankind walked among them once more. And in that first moment, Metropolis became the center of a cosmic storm neither universe was ready to endure. Have you ever wondered what would happen if two beings, each a savior to their own kind, stood face to face, and saw not hope, but judgment in one another's eyes? Before we continue, remember this: if you stay till the end, you'll witness a revelation that redefines what power truly means, even in universes of gods and monsters. The air above Metropolis trembled. Superman hung in the sky, his cape unmoving, his heartbeat suddenly heavy in his chest. He didn't need his super hearing to know something had just arrived. Something not of this world. His eyes, keen enough to see the atomic dance of matter, could barely focus on the figure below. It wasn't just light bending around the stranger. It was reality itself, uncertain of what to make of him. Down below, the Emperor of Mankind looked upward, his ancient eyes piercing through the clouds. The psychic echo of his will pulsed outward not as an attack, but as an assertion of existence. A statement written in the fabric of thought: I am here. I always have been. For an instant, Superman's mind filled with whispers. Not evil, not malicious, but vast, cold, and endless. He saw flashes: cities made of gold, endless armies kneeling before a throne of light, and the image of a man who ruled over the ashes of a dying galaxy. Then, silence. Superman descended. He landed lightly on the rooftop, a few meters away from the figure whose mere presence had caused every machine in Metropolis to falter. He spoke first, voice calm but wary. Who are you? The Emperor regarded him quietly. His gaze alone carried centuries of sorrow, a burden Superman could feel. I am he who guides humanity, the Emperor said. I am the hand that shaped your kind in the beginning. Yet, I see this world has forgotten its maker. Superman frowned. Humanity doesn't need a master. They have their own path. The Emperor's expression didn't change, but the air grew heavier. The clouds above darkened, not from weather, but from thought, the psychic resonance of a mind forged in the fires of 10,000 wars. You speak of freedom, the Emperor said, voice echoing in both sound and thought. But freedom without guidance breeds ruin. I have seen it. I have bled for it. Superman took a cautious step forward. Maybe. But on this world, we've learned to hope. To help each other. To rise when we fall. You sound like someone who's lost faith in people. For the first time in millennia, the Emperor hesitated. Lost faith? He had sacrificed his flesh, his dreams, his sons, all for humanity's survival. Faith had become a memory, buried beneath a mountain of corpses. And yet, here stood this alien, born of a dead world, believing more fiercely in humanity than the Emperor himself. The contradiction stung. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind howled between them, carrying the weight of galaxies. Around them, the city stirred, unaware of how close it stood to annihilation. Then, a tremor ran through the ground. Not from either of them but from elsewhere. Something old, cold, and chaotic had noticed the Emperor's arrival. The veil between universes had weakened, and through it crept a whisper that both men felt deep in their souls. Superman's eyes flashed red. You feel that too? The Emperor's voice dropped to a whisper. The warp follows even here. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, and for the first time, Superman saw fear in him. Not of death but of infection. Of corruption. The Emperor's very presence had torn open a wound between realities, and now, something hungry was reaching through. Superman clenched his fists. Then we stop it? The Emperor looked at him, studying the Kryptonian as one might study a newly discovered species. You would fight beside me? Superman nodded once. If you're here to protect humanity, then yes. If you're here to rule it, we'll have a problem. The Emperor almost smiled, a ghost of an emotion he'd long forgotten. Then let us begin, Kall. Let us see if this world's hope is strong enough to survive what comes next. Above them, the sky tore open like a wound. Crimson light poured through the clouds, and distant, monstrous whispers echoed the first tendrils of the warp touching the DC universe. And at that moment, for the first time in his eternal existence, the Emperor of mankind felt something dangerously close to awe. Not because of the darkness arriving, but because of the light standing beside him. Have you ever wondered what happens when two realities, each ruled by their own gods, collide and neither one is willing to bow? Stay till the end, because what unfolds next will change the very definition of divinity in both universes and reveal which side truly deserves the future of mankind. The sky above Metropolis had become a scar. The warp, once confined to a distant galaxy of endless war, now bled its corruption into the blue heavens of Earth. Clouds twisted into impossible shapes, reality bent at the seams, and voices from beyond sanity whispered through the air. Superman felt it, a kind of psychic radiation, wrong in every sense of the word. His Kryptonian cells screamed at its touch. It wasn't kryptonite. It was worse. It was meaning. The air itself remembered suffering, and it tried to tell him every story of pain all at once. The Emperor stood unmoving, his golden aura pushing back the taint like a burning sun. His voice, low and calm, resonated through both matter and thought. This corruption should not exist here. Your universe is untouched by chaos. It should have remained pure. Superman's eyes blazed. Then whatever brought you here brought that too. The Emperor said nothing, but deep within his mind, a truth began to form, a terrible, undeniable truth. His presence, his essence, was the bridge. His mere existence, powered by 10,000 years of psychic agony, had ripped open a gate between realms. He was the infection. And yet, he couldn't turn back. The wound was open now, and the warp would devour this world unless sealed from within. From the crimson haze above, the first forms emerged. Shadows of things that had once been human, twisted, clawed, and screaming. Daemons of Kern and Tsianch, tasting a new universe for the first time, free from the Emperor's dominion. Superman launched into the sky without hesitation, fists igniting with solar fury. He struck one of the creatures and watched it explode into shards of light and ash. But for every one he destroyed, 3 more crawled from the bleeding sky. Below, the Emperor raised his hand and the world itself seemed to kneel. The air ignited, reality straightened, and a wave of golden fire swept across the heavens. Each daemon that touched it burned away, their essence unmade by sheer will. For a fleeting instant, Superman paused mid-flight, gazing down in awe. That wasn't magic. It wasn't science. It was something beyond both the raw authority of existence itself. The Emperor's voice thundered across the storm. I am the guardian of humanity. I am the light that endures the endless night. You will not claim them. But the warp laughed. It knew him. It had waited for him. A voice smooth, mocking, ancient echoed through the Emperor's mind. Even here, you run from your truth. You think yourself savior, but you are the wound that never heals. For a heartbeat, his golden fire faltered. Superman noticed the hesitation, the shadow behind the Emperor's stoic eyes. "Whatever it's saying, ignore it," Superman shouted, cutting through another swarm of creatures. "We can stop this together." But the Emperor's silence was heavy. The words of the warp were true. Every empire he built, every sacrifice he demanded, had come at the cost of his sons, his people, his humanity. And now, in a universe untouched by war, he saw what he'd destroyed and what he'd become. Superman landed beside him, breathless but unbroken. "I don't know who you were, or what you've done. But you're here now. You can still choose." The Emperor looked at him, this alien who had never known the warp, who had never felt the corruption of chaos, who still believed in hope despite all odds. And for the first time in an age, he envied him. Hope. The one weapon he no longer wielded. He closed his eyes. And then light. A pulse of psychic brilliance erupted from his body, spreading across the sky like a second dawn. The warp screamed and recoiled. Daemons disintegrated, reality sealed itself, and the sky began to heal. Superman shielded his eyes from the brilliance, and when it finally faded, the Emperor stood at the center, burning, radiant, but weakened. The gate was closed, for now. Superman exhaled slowly. "You did it?" The Emperor turned to him, his expression unreadable. "No, Kryptonian." "You did." Superman frowned. "I just fought beside you." "No," said the Emperor quietly. "You reminded me what I had forgotten." And then silence again. The kind that follows after thunder. Above them, the clouds drifted apart, and sunlight bathed the city in warmth. The warp had been driven back. But its mark remained faint, hidden, waiting. The Emperor of mankind had come to the DC universe. And even as he saved it, he knew he had changed it. Forever. Somewhere deep in the void, an ancient voice whispered in delight. 2 universes. 1 wound. The game begins. What would you do if you realized you were the reason evil found your world? Stay till the end, because what happens next will decide not only the fate of the DC universe, but whether the Emperor himself deserves redemption, or eternal damnation. For a brief, fragile moment, peace held. Metropolis breathed again. The sky returned to blue, the sun cut through the remnants of crimson haze, and people who had seen nightmares in daylight convinced themselves it had been a storm, a trick of the atmosphere, a dream they would forget by morning. But the Emperor of mankind knew better. Even now, he could feel the fracture in reality, a wound beneath the surface of existence, whispering, pulsing, waiting. It was quiet, but not gone. It was listening. Superman hovered nearby, scanning the atmosphere for traces of energy, unaware that his own presence anchored something deeper now, the first meeting of light and darkness that this world had ever known. The Emperor turned his gaze toward the horizon. His golden armor, dull from battle, reflected the city's glow. He was silent, but within his mind, the echoes of the warp still hissed. "You cannot cleanse yourself," the voices whispered. "Every world you touch becomes a grave." And in that moment, the Emperor understood the truth he had refused to see, that he was not merely a guardian of humanity, but its curse. His psychic might, his very soul, was a beacon for the horrors that hunted mankind across realities. He was the light that drew the darkness closer. Superman landed beside him, his tone careful but firm. "You're holding back something. I can tell." The Emperor's reply was distant. "Your world is not yet ready to know the price of my existence." "Then tell me," Superman said. "Because if there's danger coming, I need to understand it." The Emperor's eyes, ancient, sorrowful turned toward him. Danger does not come, Kryptonian. It arrives with me. Before Superman could respond, the world shook. The air split with a soundless rupture, and light black, inverted, alive poured through the sky. The gate reopened. From it emerged not daemons, but something far worse. Intellect. A presence old enough to predate chaos itself. It was shapeless and infinite, but its voice carried across the minds of every living being. You have crossed the barrier, Emperor. You bring your corruption to new soil. We will cleanse it. Superman flinched, clutching his head as the telepathic wave cut through his mind. What is that? The Emperor's tone hardened. The warp answers to no single god. But what stands before us, is the sum of its will. A consciousness made from the madness of all creation. Superman's face set in determination. Then we fight it? The Emperor looked at him, and in his heart, for the first time, he believed that perhaps this man could. They rose together, one powered by the eternal light of a dying sun, the other by the agony and faith of a galaxy-spanning empire. The sky darkened as the black storm descended, coalescing into shapes, into symbols, into faces. The Emperor's past sins took form: Horus, Magnus, Lorgar. His sons, reborn in mockery, whispering through the warp's wool. Superman shouted over the roaring storm, "It's using your memories against you. Then it will regret remembering them," the Emperor answered. He raised his hand, and for the first time since leaving his universe, unleashed his full psychic might. The air shattered. Every atom screamed in reverence. The warp trembled, torn apart by a force that defied comprehension. Superman followed, plunging through the chaos, his heat vision cutting through the storm like divine fire. Together, they struck light and will combined, two gods of different origins fighting for one fragile truth: humanity deserved to exist. The warp howled. Reality fractured. And through the cracks, the multiverse looked back. The fight tore through layers of existence. The Emperor's psychic fire burned through dimensions, his will reshaping the madness into order. Superman's strength, magnified by the Emperor's mind, struck like judgment. But power has a price. Every blow, every surge of light, weakened the Emperor's tether to existence. He could feel himself unraveling, his essence burning away to keep the gate sealed. Superman reached out, shouting, "You can't do this alone." The Emperor's gaze softened. "I never could." He poured the last of his energy into a single act, a wave of psychic sanctity that washed over the entire world, sealing the gate, erasing the warp's presence from every trace of reality. Silence followed. The storm was gone. The sky was clear. But the rooftop where the Emperor had once stood was empty. Superman hovered there, scanning for life signs. None. Only the echo of a whisper that lingered in his mind. "Protect them. For they are still my sons." And then, nothing. Across the stars, somewhere beyond the veil of understanding, a golden light drifted through the void, not dead, not alive, but watching. Waiting for the moment when mankind would need its Emperor once more. And in the calm that followed, Superman looked up at the sky, his voice low. "Whoever you were, thank you." He turned, the light of the sun glinting off his eyes, unaware that somewhere deep within that same light, a spark of gold flickered in return. The Emperor of mankind had vanished. But his legacy had only just begun. Have you ever wondered what happens after a god leaves the world he saved? Stay till the end, because what follows isn't just an ending, it's the birth of a legend that reshapes two universes forever. The days that followed the storm were quiet. Too quiet. Metropolis had returned to its rhythm: sirens, traffic, laughter, and news broadcasts explaining away the impossible. Scientists spoke of atmospheric distortions. Priests called it divine intervention. And conspiracy theorists whispered about a golden being that stood beside Superman in the sky. But those who had really seen it knew that something more had occurred. They could feel it in their dreams, in the hum of the city, in the strange calm that hung over the earth. Superman, meanwhile, hadn't spoken about that day since. He didn't have to. Every time he looked toward the sun, he remembered the man who had fought beside him: not a hero, not a villain, but something entirely different. The Emperor of mankind. He had come from a place of eternal war, born from the psychic agony of countless souls, forged by the worst the human spirit could offer. And yet, in this universe, a world of ideals, of hope, of second chances, he had found something he never expected: peace. For weeks, Superman searched. He flew beyond the atmosphere, into the void, scanning every possible trace of the energy that had sealed the warp. But all he found was silence and faint golden particles drifting like the dust of a forgotten sun. It was over. Or so he thought. Because deep beneath the Earth's surface, in a forgotten corner of the universe, a spark of golden energy flickered to life. It wasn't a body. It wasn't a consciousness. It was a memory, the last thought of a god who had refused to die. That memory began to move. It flowed like liquid light, seeking minds that could understand it. It reached scholars in Gotham, mystics in Themyscira, and scientists in Metropolis. It appeared in dreams, in equations, in visions. And to each who glimpsed it, it whispered one truth: humanity is more than survival. It is the will to become divine. The world changed quietly after that. Advances in technology accelerated without explanation. New forms of energy appeared, faintly resonating with psychic frequencies unknown to Earth science. Humanity began to think differently, faster, deeper, unified. And those who sought power for its own sake began to feel a weight pressing upon them, as if something unseen was watching, judging. The Emperor's shadow lingered, not as tyranny, but as reminder. Superman stood atop the Daily Planet one night, looking down at the glowing city. Batman had joined him, silent as always. "He's gone," Batman said. "And yet, I feel him." Superman nodded. "Maybe he didn't die. Maybe he became part of what he was always trying to protect." Batman turned slightly, his voice low. "Or maybe he left something behind." Superman looked at him, puzzled. Bruce held out a small fragment, a sliver of gold metal, etched with symbols no one on Earth could decipher. "We found this at the site where he disappeared. It's not Kryptonian. Not human either. It's something else." Superman took it carefully. The moment his fingers touched it, a whisper brushed his mind, not in words, but in meaning. A feeling of purpose, of order, of destiny. He looked up at the stars. Wherever he is, he's still watching. And perhaps he was. Because far beyond even the source wall, beyond dimensions untouched by mortal sight, a throne sat in silence. Upon it rested a figure of pure light, no longer bound by flesh, no longer chained by empire. He gazed into the infinite, watching both universes unfold. The Emperor of mankind, reborn not as ruler, but as witness. No longer the master of humanity, but its silent guardian. He saw Krypton's last son carrying hope across galaxies. He saw Wonder Woman teaching peace through strength. He saw Batman defying darkness with reason. He saw humanity flawed, fragile, and yet more divine than any god he'd ever known. And for the first time in millennia, he smiled. The warp no longer whispered. The gods of chaos no longer reached for him. For he had transcended them all. In the end, the Emperor did not conquer the DC universe. He became part of it. Not as a ruler. Not as a god. But as the echo of mankind's greatest truth, that even in the darkest cosmos, light can find a way to be reborn. And somewhere, in the stillness between stars, a voice ancient, calm, and proud whispered through eternity, what if one man's sacrifice didn't just save a world, but changed the course of every world forever? Stay till the end, because this is where the story comes full circle, where the choices of gods echo through time, and the destiny of mankind evolves beyond what either universe could imagine. Months passed. The universe settled, but the ripples of the Emperor's arrival continued to spread. Not through destruction, not through war, but through awakening. Something within the fabric of reality had shifted. In the halls of the Justice League, strange phenomena began to appear. Telepaths reported faint golden signatures in the minds of humans across the planet, not harmful, but enlightening. Their thoughts were sharper. Their empathy, stronger. The psychic potential of humanity was growing. Martian Manhunter was the first to notice it. He described it as a hum beneath the collective mind, a resonance of order and purpose threading through the chaos of thought. It was subtle, but undeniable. Humanity was evolving. And not just on Earth. Across distant worlds, New Genesis, then Agar, even Apocalypse, the change was felt. Something ancient and human in essence was stirring across the stars. The Emperor's echo, his psychic essence, had seeded itself into the very lattice of creation. It wasn't domination. It wasn't control. It was direction. A whisper in the dark, guiding civilizations towards something greater. Superman, now more than ever, became the bridge between gods and men. The lessons from that day haunted him, but also strengthened him. He began to speak differently, with a depth, a weight, a clarity that reminded those who heard him of something timeless. Batman noticed it too. "You're changing," he said one night. "Not just in what you do. In what you believe." Superman only smiled. "He showed me what humanity could become. I intend to help them reach it without losing what makes them human." And far away, in the hidden corners of space, the message spread. Explorers from the Green Lantern Corps discovered signs of ancient technology reactivating constructs built from golden alloy that predated even the Guardians. When they tried to analyze them, one phrase repeated in every translation: "The light of mankind endures." It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. The multiverse itself seemed to realign. The barrier between the warp and the DC universe, once torn, was now a living scar, but one sealed with purpose. It became a conduit not of corruption, but of connection. A pathway of understanding between two realities that were never meant to meet. And in the warp, where chaos had once ruled unchallenged, something extraordinary occurred. The gods felt the Emperor's absence, and for the first time, they feared what that absence meant. Kern's rage dimmed. Xiancha's schemes faltered. Even Nurgle's rot hesitated, uncertain. Because they could no longer sense the Emperor's pain, the eternal suffering that had once fed their hunger. It was gone. Replaced by stillness. By hope. The warp began to change. Golden light spread through its filth like veins of sunlight beneath dark water. Planets across the Imperium of Man, in the far future the Emperor had left behind, began to feel it too. On Terra, the Astronomicon flared with new brilliance. The corpse upon the golden throne was gone, and yet, the light it emitted was stronger than ever. The priests of the ecclesiarchy wept. They didn't understand. The throne was empty, but humanity was free. In both universes, mortals began to dream the same dream of a figure standing in light, not upon a throne of gold, but among them. A being no longer divine, but familiar. Human. Smiling. And in every dream, the figure spoke a single phrase. You are your own salvation. For the first time in the history of two realities, gods and mortals shared a single destiny. The Emperor's sacrifice had erased the line between them. His fall, his rebirth, his disappearance, it wasn't an ending. It was evolution. The DC universe had gained something it never expected: a god who believed in humanity more than in himself. And the Imperium of Man, far beyond the veil of space and time, had finally received what it had always prayed for: freedom from fear. The two universes, once strangers, now shared a pulse. Superman, staring at the night sky, could feel it, that hum in the void, that faint warmth in the stars. He whispered to himself, as if the Emperor could still hear him. Maybe that's what it means to be human: to create light even in places that were never meant to have it. And somewhere beyond the galaxies, beyond gods, beyond the reach of chaos or destiny, a single spark of gold drifted through infinity, patient, eternal, watching as mankind took its next step toward godhood. Because even in death, the Emperor of mankind had fulfilled his purpose. He had not come to conquer. He had come to remind the universe of what humanity could be when it refused to break. And that, in the end, was his greatest victory. What if gods never truly die, but become the myths that guide every world after them? Stay till the end, because this is where the story takes a turn, where legends outlive their names, and where the line between faith and truth disappears forever. Years had passed since the golden light faded from the skies of Earth. The storm that once split the heavens had become a story, a rumor passed down through whispers and half-forgotten records. Humanity, as always, moved forward, but the world felt different. There was an energy in the air, subtle, unexplainable. Technology advanced faster than logic could follow. Dreams became clearer, almost prophetic. Humanity seemed to sense something vast and guiding in the background, though no one could name it. They called it the Golden Phenomenon. Religions formed around it. Scientists tried to quantify it. Psychics meditated to touch its essence. And across every explanation, one unifying idea remains: something beyond the visible universe was helping them, guiding evolution itself. But to a select few, those who had seen the truth firsthand, it wasn't a mystery. Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, they knew that energy wasn't random. It was a remnant of the Emperor's will, the last echo of his consciousness, subtly shaping mankind toward a future he had once dreamed of but never achieved. Humanity was changing, not through conquest or domination, but through understanding, compassion, unity. The Emperor's greatest failure in his own universe had become his greatest success in this one. Still, something stirred in the void. Beyond the farthest stars, beyond the reach of any telescope or thought, an ancient intelligence observed. It wasn't benevolent, nor was it cruel. It simply was. The warp, scarred and trembling from its defeat, had adapted. Where chaos once screamed, now it whispered. It evolved, mimicking what it had always sought to destroy: order. And somewhere in that stillness, a new voice emerged, one that did not seek to devour humanity, but to understand it. The Emperor's act had infected even chaos itself with the idea of balance. But balance is fragile. Superman stood before the watchtower's great window one night, watching the earth rotate below. He felt it, that hum again, that faint golden pulse beneath reality. "He's not gone," he said quietly. "He's everywhere now." Batman stepped beside him, his voice low. "Everywhere and nowhere. The universe has a memory, Clark." And he carved himself into it. Diana, standing between them, nodded. "He has become myth like the gods of old. Only this time, the myth is alive." They watched as lightning flickered across the curve of the earth, illuminating cities and oceans. The world was thriving, unaware that a fragment of divinity watched over it, not as ruler, not as savior, but as witness. Across space and time, that same light touched the galaxy the Emperor had left behind, the grim and broken imperium of man. On Terra, the High Lords awoke to a miracle. The Golden Throne, once a tomb, now stood empty, yet the Astronomicon burned brighter than ever. The Emperor's priests wept and proclaimed his resurrection, but none could find him. Instead, the message that filled every soul was simple. "Rise. You no longer need me." The Imperium trembled, caught between faith and freedom. Some refused to believe, clinging to the comfort of worship. Others saw it for what it was: liberation. The age of gods was ending, and the age of mankind had begun. Two universes once divided by fate now shared a single truth. The Emperor's legacy wasn't bound by galaxy, throne, or title. It was bound by the spirit of man. Wherever humanity existed on Terra, on Earth, or beyond, his will lived within them. And though his form was gone, his presence lingered in the golden particles of starlight, in the dreams of thinkers, in the quiet courage of those who refused to surrender. In the end, the Emperor had become what he always claimed to be: not a god, but a mirror. Through him, mankind had finally seen what it could become: fearless, compassionate, infinite. And somewhere beyond time, in the space between worlds, his voice echoed softly, neither command nor decree, but a whisper meant only for those who still looked toward the stars and wondered if he was listening. "My work is done. Yours begins." What if the greatest act of godhood was learning to stop being a god? Stay till the end, because what comes next reveals the true end of the Emperor's journey, not in battle, not in triumph, but in something far more human, and far more eternal. Time moved differently now. Decades had passed, maybe centuries, but across both universes, the legend of the Golden Emperor had taken on a life of its own. In the DC universe, he was known as the Light That Endures, a myth whispered in temples and science academies alike. To the Imperium of Man, he was the Father returned, the silent architect whose absence taught humanity how to stand. But what no one knew, not even the gods, was that the Emperor still existed. Not as a ruler or spirit, but as something else entirely. He had chosen to walk among mortals again. In a quiet corner of a distant world, under a sky neither of Terra nor of Earth, a lone wanderer walked through the dust. His robes were simple, his face aged but kind, his eyes carrying the weight of countless lifetimes. He no longer bore the psychic flame of divinity. The universe no longer trembled at his will. He was for the first time simply a man. He had seen the heights of godhood. He had commanded legions, ruled galaxies, and fought monsters that tore the soul from reality. But now, as he felt the warmth of a sun on his face and the chill of wind in his bones, he understood something far greater. This was what it meant to live. No thrones. No worship. No endless war. Just existence, unburdened by destiny. And yet, even in his quiet life, traces of what he once was lingered. He would pass through villages and inspire revolutions without speaking a word. He would tend to the sick, and they would recover faster than reason allowed. Children would dream of stars when he told them bedtime stories. And though he denied it, deep down he knew the light within him could never truly fade. He wasn't here to rule. He was here to remember. Across the universes, others felt his presence faintly, like the memory of a melody that once played in their childhood. Superman would sometimes pause mid-flight, sensing something in the golden hue of sunrise. Batman, older now, found himself writing about an unnamed figure in the margins of his journals. And Wonder Woman, standing before the gates of Themyscira, felt tears rise unbidden as she whispered, "He's still watching." But the Emperor wasn't watching. He was living. He had seen what immortality truly was: not eternal life, but eternal influence. Every act of courage, every spark of creation, every mind that chose empathy over power, that was him. That was his legacy. And for the first time, he smiled without sorrow. Somewhere, the warp stirred again. But it was quieter now, almost respectful. The Chaos Gods had changed, too. Where once they roared and clawed for dominion, they now whispered questions. What is balance? What is purpose? Could even they evolve? Perhaps. The Emperor didn't know. For the first time, he didn't need to know. He walked until the stars rose, and looked upon them as any mortal man would in awe. Because he had finally realized that creation was not a battlefield, nor a throne, but a conversation. Every star, every life, every heartbeat was an answer to a question he had spent eternity asking: what is humanity's purpose? Now he knew. It was to continue endlessly, imperfectly, beautifully. And so he sat beneath the stars, nameless and content, as the twin universes he had touched spun onward into the infinite dark, each carrying a fragment of his light, each a testament that even gods could learn to be human. The story of the Emperor of mankind didn't end with fire or triumph. It ended with peace, the kind of peace that only comes when a soul finally understands that it has done enough. And in that stillness, a final whisper echoed through time, through galaxies, through every mind that ever dared to dream. You were never meant to worship me. You were meant to surpass me. What if every choice we make, every dream we chase, is part of a God's final design? Stay till the end, because this is where it all comes together, where the Emperor's influence outlives even memory, shaping the destiny of worlds that never knew his name. Centuries became millennia. Civilizations rose, fell, and rose again. Empires crumbled into dust, and from their ashes came new worlds, each carrying a faint golden trace in their DNA. The Emperor's legacy had transcended history, evolving into something unrecognizable yet deeply familiar. No one remembered his name. No statues stood in his honor. No scriptures bore his words. And yet, everything humanity had become was a reflection of him. Across galaxies, humans were no longer just survivors, they were creators. They mastered the stars not through conquest, but through cooperation. They found beauty in the very chaos that once sought to destroy them. And their technology, their science, began to bridge the gap between mind and matter, between soul and cosmos. They called it the luminous principle. It wasn't religion. It wasn't faith. It was the quiet understanding that within every human mind burned a light that could outshine eternity. A light that once belonged to a being who had learned that power meant nothing without purpose. And that principle spread not as doctrine, but as instinct. Humanity had internalized the Emperor's dream so deeply that it had become a biological truth. They no longer needed gods. They no longer sought salvation. They had become the architects of their own transcendence. Meanwhile, in the farthest reaches of space, echoes of the DC pantheon endured. Superman's legend had become myth, Diana's teachings formed the backbone of new justice, and Batman's philosophy of vigilance evolved into an unspoken code of moral clarity that shaped entire star systems. But beneath all of that, beneath every code, every creed, every spark of heroism was the unseen foundation laid by the Emperor himself. The man who had once believed humanity could only be united through control had, in death, proven that it could be united through choice. And so, a new generation arose, beings of mind and light, explorers of universes, architects of realities. They traversed the multiverse not to conquer or to escape, but to understand. And among them, a legend persisted, a whisper passed down from one enlightened soul to another. Somewhere beyond time, a man made of light walked into the void, and never came back. But because he did, we are what we are. In the halls of the infinite archive, a colossal nexus of knowledge at the heart of reality, scholars debated the origins of this myth. Some said it was allegory. Some claimed it was truth. But one fragment remained in their oldest records, written in a script no one could translate except by instinct. It read, "The Emperor protects not by rule, but by remembrance." And that was the true immortality he had earned. Not eternal life. Not eternal worship. But eternal relevance. Every time a civilization chose creation over destruction, every time a hero chose sacrifice over power, every time a mortal chose to hope in the face of oblivion, the Emperor lived again. He had become the spark of choice itself. Even the cosmic beings who once ruled in arrogance, the new gods, the endless, the Watchers, began to sense it. A new force in the multiverse, one that defied divine hierarchy. A power not drawn from fear or devotion, but from the collective will of those who refused to surrender. The multiverse had evolved. It no longer revolved around gods or empires. It revolved around humanity. And in a quiet corner of existence, unseen by any telescope or spell, a single figure watched. Still human. Still wandering. The same man who once held galaxies in his hand, now smiling as he watched his children, the infinite children of man, take their place among the stars. He didn't interfere. He didn't guide. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Because they were doing exactly what he always dreamed they would, building a future without him. And in that silence, his last thought echoed across creation. They finally learned. What if humanity's greatest triumph wasn't surviving the gods, but becoming what gods could never be? Stay till the end, because this is where the cycle completes, where the Emperor's influence finally reaches its ultimate form, and where the universe itself learns what it truly means to evolve. Eras passed beyond counting. The concept of time itself began to blur as the civilizations born from the Emperor's spark transcended physical form. Humanity was no longer bound by flesh or even energy. They had become something else, something vast, collective, and self-aware. They called themselves the Continuum. Each human consciousness was a note in an infinite symphony, connected across galaxies, realities, and dimensions. They could create worlds with thought, reshape matter with intention, and traverse the multiverse as easily as their ancestors once walked across Earth. Yet, for all their power, they were not tyrants. They remembered the lessons that had shaped them, the lessons of the Emperor, the god who refused to rule. And it was in that humility that they found their true divinity. The Continuum didn't conquer worlds. They healed them. They didn't erase history. They preserved it. And when they encountered civilizations struggling against darkness, against war, chaos, or their own nature, they did not descend as saviors. They whispered. They inspired. They gave choice. The golden light that had once been the Emperor's aura now existed in everyone. It wasn't holy. It wasn't divine. It was human. But even perfection has questions. Deep within the continuum's collective mind, a singular curiosity began to surface, a memory that pulsed at the edge of their infinite awareness. A question older than time: where did we come from? The continuum began to search. Across timelines, across alternate universes, across the very currents of creation itself. They found traces, faint echoes of a man who had once walked among them. His name was lost, but his actions were carved into the foundations of reality. The Golden Warrior. The Silent Father. The one who walked away. And though none could find him, they began to feel something, a presence, ancient and gentle, guiding them not from above, but from within. It wasn't instruction. It was memory. Some among the continuum believed that he was still alive, somewhere beyond the veil of existence, watching. Others argued he had dissolved entirely into them, that they were the final evolution of his will. Both were right. For in that moment of realization, as the continuum reached the peak of its awareness, the impossible happened. Reality paused. Every particle, every star, every consciousness froze in a single heartbeat, and in that instant, the continuum saw him. Not as the emperor, not as the god, but as a man standing before them, calm, radiant, human. His eyes held galaxies, yet his voice was softer than a whisper. "You have done what I could not," he said. "You have become what I dreamed you would be." The continuum did not speak, they simply felt. Gratitude. Awe. Love. For the first time in eons, the entire human collective wept, not from sorrow, but from completion. The emperor smiled, as though he had been waiting for this moment across countless eternities. "You no longer need me," he said. "And that is the greatest gift you could ever give." And with those final words, his form began to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into everything. His essence merged with the fabric of existence itself, becoming the pulse of creation, the rhythm of thought, the eternal hum that guided all that was and ever would be. The continuum understood then he had never left them. He had always been the current that carried them forward, the spark that lit the first fire, the whisper that told the first human to look at the stars and wonder. And as the universe resumed its eternal dance, as light and life continued to unfold endlessly, a new truth settled into the heart of existence. There were no more gods. No more thrones. No more worship. Only being. Humanity had become the dream of the emperor, and in doing so, they had given birth to a universe that would never stop growing, never stop learning, never stop loving. And somewhere, in the glow of every newborn star, if you listened closely, you could still hear his final whisper, soft, distant, infinite. The light of mankind endures.